I'm really excited right now to be joined by Judah Akers, who you all may know from Judah and the Lion. Judah, how are
Yeah,
you?
doing good. It's all cozy here. I like it.
Yes, very cozy vibes in
Got your
here.
dog in my lap.
We talk
There's
about
no,
very deep things.
there's
So
no telling what I'll say with a dog in my lap.
I have your therapy already ready for you. So I've been a fan of you guys, gosh, for years. I mean, you guys have multiple albums at this point, but I really think that your latest album, The Process, is one of my favorite yet.
Thank you.
And I feel like that's just because of how vulnerable and deep it is. And I would so love to know like the life events that led you to put out an album like that, if you're willing to talk about them.
Yeah. Thank you. That's super sweet. The process. It's kind of one of those funny things where me and Brian, my bandmate, we had this idea to write a record about the process of grief. We chose the Kubler-Ross's stages, and this was about, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago. I had written a record called Pep Talks that was a lot about just kind of growing up as a Southern dude and having great parents, amazing parents, and then kind of watching their life kind of really take a turn and kind of implode in front of me. And the record is a whole lot about just kind of like their divorce and what it was like as a 24 or 5-year-old, dude kind of going through that. Cause a lot of people go through divorce before they're even born, or like with their parents, or, as an adolescent or a teenager or whatever. And so anyways, so we've always kind of written like from a personal standpoint of like what we're going through in life. And then after a couple really kind of hard deaths in my family, like it'd be really interesting to kind of write through these Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And so as we were kind of getting done with our last cycle, getting out of the pandemic, we were like, I think this is time to do it, because I had just gone through a really hard divorce. And so outside of like loss, losing my aunt and uncle, and grandpa, and, all of this kind of other stuff, and my parents kind of struggling at the time, like I feel like this is the time to write about the process of grief, because I transparently did not want to write about my divorce, for a lot of reasons. I felt like the world didn't need another divorce record. There's a lot of heartbreak records out there.
But you were also going through multiple different versions of grief. You were going through like the loss of life and grief, and also the loss of a future that you had believed in. And so to go through writing an album that was going to be multiple different versions of grief is not common. Also because we are so closely associated with one version of grief, which is the loss of somebody. But the other grief, where you have to mourn somebody that's still alive, we don't like to talk about that.
No, and I definitely was not. I told Brian, I was just like, man, I just, when I don't really want to release these songs that I'm writing because they're deeply personal, and now it's like I'm not writing about my parents' divorce, I'm writing about my own, which, when you get married, you don't ever expect to get divorced, and it comes with like a lot of shame and guilt and personal like defeats that you would have never kind of imagined. But then writing the record and having all these other kind of versions of grief of losing very close ones to suicide and other mental health issues, and really learning to kind of, I guess, cope in healthier ways than I was coping. The record's a lot about like, the nights that I was over drinking and kind of coping in ways that was not healthy for myself. And wanting people to kind of learn from those mistakes. And it ended up being just kind of this like wild, like, oh my God, like I was in denial so harshly here, whether it be with my mom's like version of kind of running away from just like what she was doing with alcohol, like denial in that, like, oh my gosh, my marriage is in shambles and I can't even like really admit that to myself or my friends or whoever. And so getting to kind of go through these stages and be like, man, that was like 2 years ago. Like I was totally in denial here. And already like the record's only been out for a couple months, but some of the stories are really wild on how people can kind of relate, whether it be through heartbreak or divorce or loss in their their family or friends or whatever. And then also just like we never imagined, like we had someone, we've had quite a few people actually now come up to us and be like, I just got diagnosed with yada, yada, yada. And the process has kind of helped me accept this diagnosis or accept this harsh thing that, you know, and that really just puts it all into perspective of life. Like you just never really know what other people are going through.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I do want to talk about your fans at some point, but I want to go back to a piece of this where you had mentioned how you had found other different coping skills to deal with something. So at what point for you did you have like that turning point where you're like, okay, I didn't want to deal with this before, but now I can write about it and I'm going to like share this with people? Like kind of walk me through that process for you of like coming to terms with what was happening and then being like, okay, I'm going to share it with the whole world.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, honestly, it's just like, it's really scary, you know, to do that. I say that there's kind of 3 steps for records for me. It's like one, writing it, which is really healing. It's really healing for all of us to creatively get out whatever you're needing to get out, whether you're a journaler or like an actual painter or a poet, regardless if you feel like a quote unquote creative, like it's good to get all that out. So the first part, like it's very healing. So when me and Brian were finally like ready to do it, was when we brought back the stages and we were like, oh, we can actually write about this in a way that's different than another heartbreak record that, you know, we all know and love. But then the second part is releasing it, and the releasing part of it is really hard because now you're like, oh, you know, insert curse word. Like now everybody's going to have like an open, like my journal, my daily journal, and all my issues and problems and victories and lows or whatever. They're going to be there for people to look at and judge,
inspect, and decide how they feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really hard. And it usually ends up with me in the back of the tour bus crying for a few hours and just kind of mourning that. And then the third part, which is the most magical part, is singing these songs live with people, and that transfer of energy, which is the reason why we all love music in general, is just to have that love kind of back to you and somehow you're someone's connecting. And so I don't know that there was necessarily like a turning point, but there was a moment when I was sitting with my he's my best friend now, at the time was like my therapist, and I was just like, man, I really am struggling here. I feel like I'm kind of in this depression, and this was kind of post you know, my heartbreak and post all this stuff, and I feel like I'm doing all these things, and I preach like health and mental health, and like, you know, I feel like a lot of people in for whatever reason, since the music has hit them in some way, like I represent this thing that is like pushing mental health and, you know, all this stuff, but I am not mentally healthy, you know. And I was like, I'm over drinking and I'm doing all this stuff, and he just looked at me and he goes, well, of course you're over drinking. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, like you've been beaten up. Like, it's okay. I wish you would just be gentle with yourself. And I was like, you don't have to be anyone's hero. And I was like, oh no, James.
You're like, thanks for that stab to the chest.
Yeah.
I was ready for
and
that.
I just like started weeping, and, you know, it just ended up being like, oh, my role as a creative or an artist is to be honest, and to peel back and to dig deep and to find those places in me that I feel like are unlovable, and let those places come up, and whether it be through confession or, you know, whatever our music is, trying to be honest and not hold back any punches, but also point people to like hope, and that there's beauty on the other side of it, regardless of the way that you're feeling at the time. So I think that turning point for me was like, even though I don't really want to write about it, there's maybe a lot of people that could relate.
You know, it's really powerful as you were talking about that, and you wrote this album as the stages of grief, but you just mentioned that you have your own stages of healing that you do all the time. And I think that's also really powerful that you recognize your own healing version. So it's like that was the process for everybody else, but this was yours. And you had mentioned something there too of that hardness of going through those feelings. Do you feel like growing up, and you know, we talk a lot about women in society and what the standards we're held to, but also for men expressing their emotions and being able to say like, I'm not okay. Most people tell you like, you're fine, just deal with it. You're a guy. Mm-hmm. Did you feel like there was that level of that for you and that played a role to like finally be able to like, okay, let me put this out here in the world, but everybody's been telling me don't do this, don't put your feelings out there. Did you ever have that experience?
Well, that's what's kind of funny, maybe ironic about me is I am that classic jock stereotype where, you know, I don't know if it was necessarily imposed on me as like an expectation. So what's funny about me, Brian and I is both of our moms are therapists.
Oh, I love that.
Or counselors. So it's like, of course, we're kind of in this like writing music about mental health and stuff.
Very in touch with your feelings.
Yeah. And so I would say in my house, it was kind of both. Like my mom was very like open, and I mean, her degree was in child development. So like she wanted the emotions to live. And then my dad, you know, I'm very close with both my parents at the moment. And my dad was like a best friend, but you know, very hard on me as a kid, the coach. Mm-hmm. And so there was both of like, I don't know if that it was necessarily imposed on me, but I did just want to be the best at sports. I wanted to not be the one that was like highly emotional and all this stuff. And so I think as I grew out of the teenage version of myself and found myself in music became this outlet for me that I feel very blessed to have. But in a lot of ways, and especially during, you know, this heartbreak, I didn't tell anyone that I was suffering for years. I mean, it took a couple years to even like, there's a song called Sis on the record that's literally about this like breakdown moment of being like, this is what's happening in my life and I just need to tell you, and I'm really ashamed of it, and I don't really even know how it got this bad, or you know, whatever the conversation was. So I do think that naturally, at least for me as a dude, I do have a propensity to hold things in and bottle it. Surprisingly enough, even with my music, being as vulnerable as it is in my personal life, it can be really difficult. And I think there's we're dudes, we want to kind of have it all together. We want to be okay, you know, like that's our desire. But at the end of the day, the truth is that, you know, everybody behind their eyelids are going through something, again, that we don't know about. Mm-hmm. And then maybe they don't even know about. I heard in one of your podcasts, you're talking about the role of like, the role that our childhood plays into our adult life. And I think that a lot of times like men don't want to go there and face all that because it's like, I'm fine. I'm not going to go dig up these wells and, you know, don't go chasing waterfalls or, you know, don't go finding.
Let's not pull the troll out from under there. Just leave her down there. Let it happen.
Yeah, I'm fine. Like, let's do it. And I hope as a dude that's trying to write honestly and bear kind of all emotions, that it is an encouragement to men out there that it's okay to be raw, to be sad, to be emotional, because that's where the good stuff lies as well.
Yeah, and I love to hear from guys who feel like they can do that, because I want other guys to know it's okay to do that. So that's a really big piece of why I wanted to have you on, because I think it's cool, your story and how you've been able to do what you do. There was another thing that you had mentioned and brought up. I also have lost a friend to suicide, which was a really, really hard time. And suicide is also a really different trigger of grief than we also don't really like to talk about, because that's just one that we like to be like, okay, I don't want to ever think about this again because this is hard and it doesn't make any sense, and it's never going to make sense. Do you have any experiences that you went through when that was learning for you that other people who might experience it? Because we are in such a interesting place with mental health that people are really struggling, and unfortunately, suicide is common. We don't want it to be, but it is. And if people are losing people to that, I want them to maybe hear from somebody who's lost to that, and like what your experiences is with that, or Just anything you can provide in that direction.
Yeah, I think again, it's the more like I live life, it's like the common thread throughout is a lot of times we just don't know what's going on in any given. That's why I love music so much. That's why I mean, even like we've known each other for years now, but there's things in your life that you're going through that I will never understand, even though we're having an amazing conversation. And I think when you lose someone to suicide, it's like, at least for me, like the first time that I did, it was very confusing to me on what I did wrong. Could I have made that call, or could I have, and I don't want to say that like making it about myself. It was just more like, I never went through the struggle of like blaming myself necessarily, but I know that's something that a lot of people deal with, especially if it's your best friend or a close friend, or, in my case, it was like close relatives. I think that there comes this kind of like, not to point back to the record, but this kind of bargaining of like, man, why did they get that low? Or was this decision like selfish, from them? Or could they help it? Could I have done anything more? And I think all those questions are really valid. I think that's what people don't really want to admit, is that the harshness of suicide is really harsh. And the odds are is like that person was just going through something so hard and real that brought them to that moment. And I kind of stopped saying they committed suicide. I've started saying they lost their life to suicide, kind of like addiction or anything like that, where it's like it's so misunderstood and so unexplained, like neurologically, or
it's a mental health disorder, disease.
It
like
is
however
a disease.
It is. You are losing your life to that because it was that was something that was neurologically the way that you viewed the world.
Yeah.
And we couldn't change that, but there was so much in there that's important. I really hope that was helpful for somebody out there. Thank you for talking about that, because I also know that's really hard to like just sit here and be like, yeah, I went through this and let me say it. There is a song on your guys' record that I really loved, Floating in the Night. Mm-hmm. It's right after the anger stage. It's in the anger stage. And much like you were talking of, you have all these questions. I think everything associated with grief, you always have this stage where there's so many questions. What did I do? What could I change? Because hindsight becomes 20/20 once you're out of something, no matter what the grief is, right?
Yeah.
There's always this, like, you're looking back, you're like, I could have done that, or I could have done this. And that anger stage is so hard. I feel like a lot of people, and like in my personal experience, you ruminate and spiral in that phase because you're just constantly asking questions a million times over and you're never going to get an answer. Mm-hmm. Like, to ask these open questions where it's like there's never going to be a response and you just have to live with that.
Yeah.
Like, that's the ruminating phase. That's where it happens. And I love that song because it really is like you're just floating and there's nothing you can do about it. Mm-hmm. You have to just exist out in the universe.
Oh, totally.
So I really love what you guys have done with all of that. I do. And I also want to talk about your fans too. You had mentioned how like some of them have come out. Like, what has that experience been like for you now, putting something so vulnerable out and people are really connecting with it?
Yeah, it's the reason why we make music is to hear the stories and to really feel like there's like purpose in it. I feel like Brian and I, we've always tried to keep the core reason why we make music the same thing. And of course we're humans. And so that gets blurred by, we want to be like selling out stadiums like so-and-so, or we want to have another hit or whatever it may be. But at the core of like the reason why we make music is to hopefully make people feel less alone. So coming out with this record, one is the most terrifying record that we've ever released for a lot of reasons. But the stories already, and again, we just start tour like I'm not sure when this podcast is going to come out, but we go on tour in October 3rd through essentially Halloween. So we haven't necessarily had the meet and greets yet, but even the radio shows that we've done, I think were surprised and honored that other people's stories, whether it be about like what we were talking about, like losing a friend or a best friend or a father or a mother or going through their own divorce and not really understanding why, or getting like, we had someone that had like a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, and then understanding, we had a man come up with his family. I don't want to get emotional, but it was just like, this might be my last show. I'm like given like 6 months to live, and the process is kind of, and so those moments are just kind of like, I want to feel that and to be there. And that moment, when you're looking down at his family or at him and you're singing these songs, everything else kind of disappears. And you're like, I don't know why these stories like really connected to that specific story and another, but it really makes me believe in the magic of music and the reason why we all love music and going to shows or whatever it may be, is having these artists that I'm not speaking about me, but the artists that I love, that you go to the shows and there's just kind of this easy magic of love that is kind of coming through the speakers and then us back to them. And I don't know. It's just like I'm kind of maybe going down some rabbit trails here, but
you can keep going. This is great.
Yeah. It's just amazing. And I think it's just, to have strangers or people that are strangers coming and then relating that to their story, in any way, is just kind of a miracle, in of a sense. And there's just this unspoken thing, I think, with humans, and this transfer of love that happens when the stories connect. So that's a really, really big honor for us.
Oh, that's a really good one. And I love that you guys are getting to experience, like, I guess the fruits of your labor is a way to put it, but like, I think being able to put something out so vulnerable, and just like you said, it was terrifying to do. But then on that other side, you're seeing, okay, this was worth it. All of this was worth it. Even if it's just for that one guy who came up and he's going through that in that moment. What's for you, like, you look at this entire experience over the course of your life so far in this, putting together this album, what's been like your biggest lesson takeaway? Like, you're talking about how your fans are taking away things from this record, but for you, from the start, from when all of these things were happening to the things that you put yourself through, to then coming out the other side, to then creating the record, like, what do you feel like has been your biggest takeaway from that whole entire process? Not, no pun intended.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I just learned so much in the last few years. So a lot of it, going back to your question about bottling stuff as a man. I had chronic back pain during my divorce. Couldn't really figure out what was going on. It was like my lower back, like kind of took me out of like running and all these things that I love. Which exercise, if you are depressed, I think is like one of the most important things that you can do. But it's funny how your body is like, well, you're sad or you're angry and you're not dealing with it. And so I went to this like doctor. They're like, you're just stressed. I was like, okay, but I cannot get rid of this back pain. Like going to the chiropractor, doing all of this stuff. In this 1 week, I just got so angry at everything. I mean, I was yelling at everyone. If you know me, that's not my default. My default is more kind of soft, or I like to say that it's more kind of soft and gentle, maybe not on the pickleball court, but
no pickleball, yeah.
But I think what I've learned. So I after that week, when I just got angry and exploded and had to apologize to a lot of friends after it, my back pain went away. And so there's this concept of your body kind of holding these emotions that
your body keeps the score.
Yes, of course. And it's so true, but the other side of that is your body. The body knows the way. And so through that, I guess what I've learned most about the process, and even going through these kind of stages, these 5 stages, is I think as an athlete, or as maybe as a man, maybe you relate to this as a woman as well, but I think I was just looking for a step-to-step program to like heal my broken heart. And so I would do anything. I mean, I was going to acupuncture. I was going to therapy, like probably too much. You know, it was just kind of like, I'm a fixer. I'm going to fix this. Like, I'm going to do whatever.
I feel that. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the dagger.
I'm going to take control of this. And the truth is there's no rule book to going through a divorce. There's no rule book to getting a terrible diagnosis. There's no rule book to, you know, losing someone in any way, whether it be a sudden death or suicide or cancer or whatever it may be. There's no rule book to it. And I think what I've learned the most is like being able to hold all of those places in you that are angry at it, that are in denial with whatever you're going through. Maybe you are an alcoholic or an addict and you are in denial, or holding this like wrestle, or what I call the bargaining, which is kind of this personal inventory of like, where am I at this? Like, why am I mad at God? You know, like why, you know, questioning, and then holding the sadness or the depression of all of it. It's truly just like learning to love the sides of you that you don't love, and learning that those need the space to come up. And when anger comes up, not to be like too hippie, but like asking the anger, like, what's up? Like, I'm not going to push you down anymore, because if I do, my back hurts. You know?
You're like, I'm going to feel that, so I'm just going to deal with this and however I can.
But it's learning to like treat all those spaces in yourself like a friend. And for other people, anger might look like frustration or resentment or jealousy or whatever, but asking like, oh, why am I jealous of this person? Or why am I'm going to let myself feel this sadness, and ask it questions like, why are you sad? Because a lot of times, like, it's probably justified why you're sad. This is a hard life. I mean, it's justified why you're angry and not understanding, you know? So I think all that to say is that the process is kind of like almost like not a process. It's like learning to just be able to hold all of it at once.
That's so hard. So
which
hard.
Sucks. It's pretty much impossible.
Yeah, well, because you look at everybody's life, and if you look at all the things that you're having to juggle, we can't. It's humanly impossible to juggle all the things that people juggle every day.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, to be okay with like all your emotions that you're experiencing, that's superhuman abilities.
Yeah.
And yet we're still sitting here all like trying to figure our way through. It's like what are we doing, guys? It's fine.
Absolutely. I mean, and like when I forgot who said this. We had so many amazing people that knew way more about these stages than what we did, but I think it might have been James who said, denial is actually your body's way of protecting itself. Like, it's this, if you were to take on all the emotions you felt like when you went through, you know, I forget if you said it was a friend or whoever it was that committed suicide. If you were to take all those emotions at once, you would die, because it's just too much. So your body has to go through this version of like, all right, I'm out. I can't deal with this right now.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, grief and heartbreak, whatever it looks like, is the hardest human emotion to experience. Mm-hmm. The rest of them kind of have this out, right? Like, you can be happy and there's an out. You can be angry and there's an out. But like true like heartbreak, you just have to deal with it and like put it back together. You don't heal. You don't like, you heal in the process, but you never are fully healed again. You're healed in a different way.
Right.
So like, to pretend that heartbreak just doesn't, of any kind of fashion, of losing an animal, of losing a friend, or experiencing a heartbreak like in a relationship, to pretend that doesn't hurt as bad as it does, mm-hmm. like that's going to give you some problems because it's such a big emotion.
Yeah. And it's kind of future tense too. It's like a lot of times, this was in a book that I was reading, I think, but it was heartbreak or a loss is not necessarily of like what it was, but the projection of what could have been, mm-hmm. and all those dreams that you had with this said person or a dog or whoever, you know, grandpa, all these things that were like, oh, I was going to build this life, and then that's gone. Mm-hmm. And so that never really necessarily goes away. Now there's a lot of healing when you get to the point of like, oh, this is what it is. You kind of learn to be in the present moment.
in your new future that you have.
Exactly. And then setting that up. But the reason why heartbreak or loss and grief is so hard is a lot of times not the, it is like what it was. Like when I lost my grandpa, I was one of my best friends. It gave me such a lesson of, there was so much love here. Like there was so much love that I lost and I miss what was. But I also miss what could have been, the golf trips or whatever it might have been.
You miss them in that moment and you miss them in the future. So you're grieving.
All the dreams. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's so good. I feel like I could talk to you all day, Judah, but I'm not going to keep you all day because you got a tour to go on.
And probably talk so much. You're such a good...
No, I honestly, it's such an important, everything you guys have done, what you're doing is really powerful. Who you are is really powerful. And I'm so glad that you took some time to sit down and talk about all this. So thank you for coming on and being open to talk about all of this stuff because I know it's hard.
Yeah, thank you. And I love your podcast. I love what you're doing too.
Thank you.
I get it, like sitting with you, like the spirit of it is really beautiful, and you have this kind of like welcoming spirit. So I'm excited for you and what's to come.
Thank you. I'm just, where
did the name come from? That's what I would
take this personally. So much like with your guys' album and wanting to help people feel less alone with your music and what you're doing, built out of the experiences of my life, I had been through really hard things, and I struggled with going through those alone a lot. Not in that I didn't have support systems, but there just wasn't a lot out there that I could relate to and feel what I was feeling and not feel crazy for it.
Yeah.
And so I wanted a podcast to be that voice then for people who are going through things when I wish I would have had it. And take this personally as just like, I hope you take it to heart. I hope that everything that you're hearing here, like, I hope it is something for you. It can be one word, it can be a whole episode, it can be multiple episodes, but whatever it may, I want you to take something from it and really like grab it and take it because it's yours.
That's cool.
So
I like that.
Built all of that. So we're doing similar things, different creative modes.
Yeah. So take this personally, mother effers.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That might be my new tagline that I end up at all of them. So
and now.
thank you for the voicing. But thanks again, Judah. It's really great to chat with you.
You too.